What if everything you believed about your family turned out to be a lie? Stay with me, because this story will take you where love, loyalty, and betrayal collide in the most unexpected way. And if you enjoy stories that stir the heart and stay with you long after they end, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. If you ask me what I remember most about my wedding day, it wouldn't be the vows, or the soft rustle of silk trailing behind me, or the dozen chandeliers casting golden light over the marble floor. It would be the silence. Not a peaceful kind of silence, but the thick, airless quiet of a room full of strangers holding champagne, flutes, pretending they didn't notice the way I stood stiff as stone beside Liam Blackwood, my new husband in name, nothing more. I remember how the air smelled faintly of cedar wood and something sharper, like whiskey left to settle in a crystal, glass. I had imagined my wedding to be different once. Not that I ever dared to dream big, but I had allowed myself one harmless wish when I was a little girl, standing on my tiptoes in our tiny kitchen, watching my mother hum a lullaby while kneading bread dough. "Someday, Evelyn," she used to say, smiling over her shoulder, "you'll marry for love." I swallowed the ache in my throat as the officiant's voice faded into a polite round of applause. It sounded rehearsed, hollow, like someone had pressed play on a tape recorder. Liam didn't take my hand. He didn't even look at me. I couldn't blame him. This marriage wasn't his choice either. It was business. My father's debt, crippling, shameful, and quietly hushed up behind closed doors, had been traded for me. I was the bargaining chip, the paper-thin bridge holding two crumbling worlds together. The reception blurred into meaningless greetings and forced smiles. I stood by Liam's side like a statue, nodding at faces I didn't recognize, accepting congratulations that felt like tiny cuts on already bruised skin. And when it was over, when the guests filed out into the cool night air, leaving us alone in the cavernous mansion I had only seen in photographs, I did what any dutiful daughter-turned-wife would do. I waited. I waited in the dim hallway outside what they called the bridal suite. My hands trembled as I traced the embroidered edge of my gown. My breath caught when I heard his footsteps behind me, slow and measured, like he was walking toward something he already regretted. "You don't have to pretend, Evelyn." His voice broke the silence, low and unreadable. "I'll take the sofa. The room is yours." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My chest ached with something sharp and small, like a splinter I didn't know how to pull out. The door clicked shut behind him, and I stood there, alone again. I don't know what made me walk to the far corner of the suite. Maybe it was the need to feel something, anything that belonged to me. Maybe it was instinct. My fingers brushed against the old bookshelf, worn and oddly out of place in a room so perfectly designed. That's when I saw it. A small wooden box, tucked behind the thick spines of books no one had touched in years. My breath caught as I pulled it out carefully, wiping away a fine layer of dust. The moment I opened it, I knew. It was hers. My mother's. The scent of lavender drifted up. Faint, but unmistakable. Inside, carefully folded, was a letter. Yellowed, at the edges, written in the familiar curve of my mother's handwriting. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Dearest Margaret Blackwood, there are debts that cannot be paid with money. I hope you understand why I kept my distance. I pray one day our children will not carry the weight we failed to set down." I froze. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might tear through my ribs. Blackwood. My mother had written to a Blackwood. Read it again, slower this time, but the words didn't change. Our children. I pressed the letter to my chest, blinking back tears that burned too hot to fall. I didn't understand. What weight? What debt? What had my mother kept from me all these years? And why had this letter been hidden here, in his house, like it had been waiting all along for me to find it? My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. And for the first time since I walked down that cold marble aisle, I felt something stir inside me. Not fear, not duty, but something else. The faint, trembling edge of truth. I didn't know what I would do next, but I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again. I carried the letter with me everywhere after that night. Slipped it between the pages of an old poetry book I pretended to read at breakfast. Tucked it beneath my pillow. When I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this mansion breathing in the dark, I hadn't dared ask Liam about it. Not yet. Maybe because I feared what he'd say. Or worse, what he wouldn't. Days blurred into one another like pale watercolor bleeding across the edges of my life. I stayed in the West Wing, where no one asked me questions or expected anything, other than my quiet presence at the dining table. Liam barely spoke to me. When he did, his voice was always polite, distant, as if we were two strangers who happened to share a last name. He never entered the bridal suite again. Never crossed the threshold, and I started waiting for the footsteps I used to dread, but they never came. He spent his days locked in his study, buried in phone calls and quiet meetings with people I never saw. And at night, I heard the creak of the leather sofa in the library where he slept instead of beside me. It should have been a relief, but somehow it wasn't. One morning, after another silent breakfast, I wandered into the kitchen, hoping to lose myself in some small, meaningless task. Anything to make this house feel less like a museum of someone else's life. I ran my fingers over the edge of the polished counter, remembering the chipped wooden one from home. The smell of baking bread. The soft hum of my mother's voice filling the air like sunlight. I could almost hear her again. Someday, Evelyn, you'll know what it feels like to be chosen, not traded. The ache in my chest tightened. That night, as I made my way back to the bridal suite, I noticed something sitting on the windowsill. A small, delicate porcelain cup. Steam curled from the surface of the tea inside. Chamomile. The kind my mother used to make when I couldn't sleep. My breath caught in my throat. I glanced down the hallway. No one was there. No footsteps. No sound. I wrapped my hands around the cup, the warmth sinking into my palms, anchoring me to something real for the first time in days. I didn't know how it got there, but somehow I knew. I started noticing more after that. The way the lights in the hallway outside my suite were always dimmed just enough that I wouldn't stumble when I returned late. The way the fire in the sitting room never went out until after I'd gone upstairs. The way my favorite book, the one I used to keep in the shop back home, appeared on the shelf in the library, like someone had gone searching for it just for me. I wanted to believe these things meant something. But every time I dared to hope, Liam would appear, stoic, unreadable, and remind me that hope was dangerous in a house like this. One evening, as I lingered at the edge of the library door, I heard his voice. Low, sharp. He was on the phone. No, I told you I won't authorize it. A pause. Because the Carter bookshop stays where it is. End of discussion. I pressed my back to the wall, my heart thudding. No one had mentioned the shop since the wedding. I had assumed it was gone. Sold or shuttered to cover my father's debts. But it wasn't. Liam had kept it open. Without telling me. Without asking for thanks. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of my sleeve. Why? Why would a man who barely looked at me protect something I loved without expecting me to know? I wanted to step into the room, to ask him, to confront the silent wall he'd built between us. But my feet refused to move. I stayed there until the conversation ended, until the light in the library flickered off and Liam passed by me without a word, not noticing how my hands trembled at my sides. That night, I sat at the window with the letter in my lap, staring out at the empty garden below. I ran my fingers over the ink, tracing my mother's words again and again, searching for something, anything, that could explain why Liam Blackwood, the man I had married out of duty, would care enough to leave tea by my door or save the one, place that still felt like home. I thought of asking him, but the words tangled in my throat like thorns. Instead, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in its box, and slid it under the bed. Not because I was ready to forget, but because I knew, deep down, that whatever truth lay hidden between us, I wasn't strong enough to face it. Not yet. It started with a phone call I wasn't meant to overhear. I hadn't meant to listen. I'd only wandered downstairs that morning, hoping the fresh air on the terrace might clear my head. The house felt smaller by the day, its quiet halls tightening around me like the laces of a corset pulled too tight. I longed for something simple. Sunlight on my face, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of my mother humming in the kitchen. But when I stepped past the library door, I heard my father's voice. Sharp, low, and frantic. No. She doesn't know. A pause. She can never know. I froze. My fingers curled around the edge of the doorway. I told you I handled it. That family owes us nothing now. Do you understand me? Nothing. The blood drained from my face. I knew that tone. I'd heard it all my life. The voice my father used when he was hiding something, when he was trying to cover a truth too ugly to face. I took a step back, careful not to make a sound, but the floor creaked softly beneath me. My father's voice, cut off. Who's there? I turned to leave, but the door swung open behind me. Evelyn. I stood frozen as my father appeared, his face pale, his eyes wide with something that looked too much like fear. What are you doing here? He asked, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I was just getting some air, I whispered. His gaze flicked toward the phone in his hand, then back to me. He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides, lowering his voice. You didn't hear anything. Do you understand? I swallowed hard. Who are you talking to? He reached for my arm, gripping it tighter than he needed to. Evelyn. Let it go. But I couldn't. Not this time. I pulled my arm free, stepping back. What did you do, Dad? His face crumpled, just for a moment, before he straightened, again. It's complicated. I'm not a child anymore, I whispered. Tell me the truth. He ran a hand through his graying hair, looking suddenly smaller than I remembered. It was years ago, he said quietly. Before you were old enough to understand. Your mother begged me to walk away, but I didn't listen. What did you do? I asked again, my voice shaking. He looked away, staring out the window as if he could outrun the words. I took something that didn't belong to me, he said at last. From the Blackwoods. I made a mistake, a big one. I felt the ground shift beneath me. All these years, the debt, the marriage. I couldn't catch my breath. It wasn't just about saving the shop, was it? His silence was answer enough. I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting the wave of nausea rising in my throat. You used me to pay for your mistake, I whispered. His shoulders slumped. I never wanted it to come to this. I shook my head, the weight of it all crushing me from the inside out. Did Mom know? He nodded once, slowly. She knew. She tried to fix it, in her own way. I thought of the letter, the one she had written to Margaret Blackwood, a debt that couldn't be paid with money. Why didn't you tell me? I choked out. Because I was ashamed, he whispered. And because I thought, maybe if you married him, it would all go away. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. It didn't go away, I said softly. You just gave it a new name. I left the house before he could stop me. I didn't know where I was going. only that I had to get out. I found myself walking toward the garden, at the far end of the estate, where the trees stood tall and bare against the winter sky. The wind bit at my skin, sharp and unforgiving, but I welcomed the sting. I didn't hear Liam until he was standing right behind me. "Evelyn." I turned, wiping my face with the back of my sleeve. I didn't care if he saw me cry. Not anymore. "You knew, didn't you?" I whispered. He didn't deny it. He didn't have to. "How long?" My voice broke. "How long have you been cleaning up his mess?" Liam's jaw clenched. He ran a hand over his face, looking more human than I'd ever seen him. "Long enough," he said quietly. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream, to shove him away, but my body betrayed me. My knees buckled, and before I could hit the ground, he caught me. His arms wrapped around me, steady and warm. "I tried to keep you out of it," he murmured into my hair. "I tried to protect you from all of this." Pressed my fists against his chest. "Why? Why not tell me the truth?" His breath shuddered against my skin. "Because I didn't want you to hate me," he whispered. The words shattered something inside me. Not because they hurt, but because they felt real, honest, raw. I pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. For the first time since the day we met, I saw past the mask he wore so carefully. And what I saw wasn't coldness. It was fear. Fear of losing me. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared to believe before. I wasn't the only one who'd been traded in this marriage. Liam Blackwood had given up something too. Maybe it wasn't love. Not yet, but it was a beginning. And for the first time, I let myself hope. I didn't speak to my father for days. I couldn't. Not because I hated him, though for a moment I might have, but because I didn't trust myself to say the things I really felt without shattering what little was left of us. Liam kept his distance, too. He didn't push, didn't ask questions. He only left the small things behind again. A fresh cup of tea on the windowsill. A soft light left burning in the hallway. A book I'd mentioned once in passing, now resting on the nightstand by my bed. Quiet gestures. Like he was waiting for me to notice that he'd been noticing all along. And I did. I noticed everything now. I spent my nights in the library after the house had gone still, curling up on the velvet sofa where he used to sleep. I traced my fingers over the letter my mother had written, reading the words until they blurred into something I could no longer untangle. There are debts that cannot be paid with money. I closed my eyes, clutching the paper to my chest. She had tried to protect me, and I had let her down by walking blindly into this marriage without demanding the truth. I couldn't undo what had already been done, but I could finish what she started. I found my father in the study 2 days later, sitting at the desk with his head in his hands. He looked older than I remembered, tired, defeated. He didn't look up when I entered. He must have known I'd come. I stood in the doorway, gripping the letter tightly in my hand. "You need to tell them the truth," I said softly. He flinched, like the words had cut deeper than I meant them to. "I can't," he whispered. "If I admit what I did, our name will be ruined. Everything your mother and I built, gone." I took a step closer, my voice steady. "It's already gone, Dad. You gave it away the moment you used me to fix it." His head snapped up, pain flickering in his eyes. "You think I don't know that?" His voice cracked. "You think I haven't hated myself every single day for what I've done?" I swallowed hard. "Then make it right." He shook his head slowly, burying his face in his hands again. "I'm not strong enough," he choked. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the man I used to believe could fix anything. The man who had taught me how to tie my shoes and read me stories by lamplight when the power went out in winter. And I knew. He wasn't going to save us. Not this time. So I turned away. And I did something I never thought I could do. I went to Liam. I found him on the back terrace, standing alone, beneath the pale morning sky. His hands were braced on the stone railing, his head bowed like the weight of something invisible was pressing down on him. I swallowed the fear rising in my throat and stepped closer. "Liam," I whispered. He turned slowly, surprise flickering across his face. But he didn't speak. He waited. I held out the letter, my hands trembling. "I need your help," I said quietly. His brow furrowed as he took the paper from me, reading the words with something like recognition in his eyes. "Where did you get this?" he asked softly. "My mother left it for me, I think. I think she wanted me to finish what she couldn't." He looked up, his jaw tightening. "And what do you want to do, Evelyn?" I took a shaky breath. "I want you to bring this to your board," I said, my voice steadying with every word. "Tell them the truth. About my father. About everything." Liam's eyes darkened. "If I do that, your family's name—" "No," I interrupted gently. "But I can't let this hang over us anymore. Not over you. Not over me." He stared at me for a long moment, like he was seeing me for the first time. Then without a word, he nodded. And just like that, I felt something shift between us. Not distance, not silence, but understanding. That evening, Liam left for the city. He didn't tell me where he was going, but I knew. He was doing what I couldn't do alone. I stayed behind, pacing the halls of the mansion, replaying every word I'd said, every word I wished I'd said. I made tea in the kitchen, the way my mother used to, filling the small space with the soft clink of porcelain and the faint scent of chamomile. And I waited. 2 days passed before Liam returned. I was standing by the front window when I saw his car pull up the long, winding drive. My heart pounded in my chest as he stepped out, his face unreadable. I met him at the door, breathless. "Well?" I whispered. He didn't speak right away. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. Something I hadn't expected. A letter, sealed with the Blackwood family crest. He handed it to me, his fingers brushing mine. "I told them the truth," he said softly. "But I also told them something else." I looked up, searching his face. "I told them I take full responsibility for the agreement between our families, that the marriage was my decision, not yours, and that if anyone questions your family's name again, they answer to me." Tears filled my eyes, spilling over before I could stop them. "Why?" I whispered. Liam's gaze softened, his voice breaking just enough for me to hear the truth I'd waited so long to hear. "Because I'm not going to let you carry this alone, Evelyn. Not anymore." It was a strange thing, waking up in this house the next morning and feeling like I could finally breathe again. Not because anything had really changed. The walls were the same, the silence still wrapped around me like a second skin. But something in the air felt lighter, as if all the heavy things that had hung between us had finally begun to settle. Liam was gone when I came downstairs. No note. No message. But somehow, I didn't feel abandoned this time. I felt trusted. So I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I walked into the kitchen and made tea. Not just for me. For both of us. The kettle hissed softly as the steam rose, curling into the air like a memory I hadn't touched in years. I set 2 cups on the small table by the window, just like my mother used to do when she waited for my father to come home from the shop. I could almost hear her voice again. "Sometimes you have to show people where home is, Evie. Sometimes they forget." I sat there for a long time, watching the steam disappear into the morning light. I didn't hear him come in, but when I looked up, Liam was standing in the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, like he wasn't sure if he belonged there. I pushed the second cup toward him, my fingers curling around the porcelain to keep them from shaking. He didn't move at first, but then, slowly, He crossed the room and lowered himself into the chair across from me. His eyes flicked to the cup, then to my face. "You made this?" he asked quietly, like it was something fragile he didn't know how to hold. I nodded. He reached for the cup, wrapping his hands around it like it was the first warm thing he'd touched in years. He didn't drink right away. He just sat there, holding it, breathing like he'd run all the way back from the city. I watched him for a moment, my throat tightening. "Thank you," I whispered, his head lifted, his eyes locking on mine. "For what?" His voice was rough, like he didn't trust what he was hearing. "For standing up for me," I said softly. "For protecting my family's name, even when you didn't have to." He set the cup down carefully, leaning forward like the weight of those words had knocked the breath out of him. "I did have to," he whispered. "I just didn't know how to tell you." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. "Tell me now," I whispered. He let out a shaky breath, like he'd been holding it for years. "I didn't marry you because I wanted to punish your family," he said quietly. "I married you because I didn't know any other way to protect you. And somewhere along the way, I stopped caring about the deal, about the name, about all of it." He looked down at his hands, shaking his head. "All I could think about was you, sitting alone in this house, looking at me like I was the enemy." His voice cracked, and knowing I deserved every bit of it. I felt the tears rising again, hot and sharp. "I hated you," I whispered. "I thought you only saw me as a way to fix what my father broke." Liam looked up, his eyes shining with something I hadn't seen before. Not coldness, not duty, something painfully, achingly human. "I did," he admitted softly. "At first. But then you kept standing there, holding your head high when everyone else would have crumbled. And I couldn't stop seeing you." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something raw and quiet. "I've spent my whole life building walls to keep people out, but you found every door I thought I locked." I let out a shaky breath, my hands trembling. "And now," I whispered. Liam reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine, slow, careful, like he didn't want to break the moment. "Now, I don't want the walls anymore," he whispered. "I just want you." The tears fell then, silent and sure. I stood slowly, moving around the table until I was standing in front of him. He looked up at me, something unspoken hanging in the air between us. I reached for his hand, curling my fingers around his. And for the first time since the day I said "I do," I meant it. "I want you too," I whispered. He stood, his hands framing my face like he was afraid I might disappear if he blinked. But I didn't pull away this time. I leaned into him, resting my forehead against his chest. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, the soft ticking of the clock filling the space between our heartbeats. When he finally spoke, his voice was a whisper against my hair. "I'm not good at this, Evelyn," he breathed. "I don't know how to love someone the way they deserve." I pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, my voice steady. "Then let's figure it out together. It's strange how a house can feel like a stranger for so long. And then, in a single quiet moment, begin to feel like home." The air still smelled like cedar and polished wood. The high ceiling still stretched too far above my head. But as Liam held me in the kitchen that morning, I realized it wasn't the house that had changed. It was us. Later that evening, the power went out. Not the whole city, just here. Just us. The heavy winds had picked up before sundown, shaking the old trees in the garden. Somewhere between dinner and silence, the lights flickered once, twice, and then everything dimmed into darkness. I stood at the window of the sitting room, the outline of Liam moving toward the fireplace behind me. I heard the soft sound of matches striking. 3, maybe 4, before a soft glow filled the space. No television, no overhead lights, just firelight. And for the first time in this big, echoing house, I didn't feel like I had to fill the silence with words. I turned, watching him kneel by the hearth, feeding the flames like he'd done this 1,000 times before. His sleeves were rolled up, his jaw tense in concentration. But when he glanced over his shoulder and caught me watching, something shifted in his face. Not the guarded distance I'd grown used to. Not the cold, unreadable mask. Something softer. Something real. "Come here," he said quietly. I crossed the room without thinking, drawn by something I couldn't name. He held out a blanket, wrapping it around my shoulders like he had all the time in the world to stand there, doing nothing else but this. I didn't step back. Not this time. He sank onto the old sofa beside me, the fire crackling low between us. The storm raged beyond the windows, but in here, it felt like we were sealed inside something weightless, something warm. I curled my legs under me, clutching the blanket tighter. "I used to love nights like this," I whispered, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Back home, when the lights went out, my mother would light candles all over the house. She said the darkness always made the tea taste sweeter. Liam's lips curved, just a little. She was probably right, he murmured. I turned to look at him, startled by the softness in his voice. "Tell me something," I said before I could lose my nerve. He nodded once, waiting. I pulled the blanket tighter around me. "What were you really thinking the day we got married?" Liam leaned back, his eyes searching the shadows above us like the words might be written there. "I thought you hated me," he admitted quietly. I swallowed hard. "I did. For a while." He nodded again, as if he'd known that all along. "Told myself it didn't matter," he continued, his voice rough. "That it was just a deal. A way to end the feud, protect the family name, settle the debt." He turned to face me fully, his jaw tightening. "But when I saw you standing at the altar, looking like you wanted to be anywhere but there, I hated myself more than you ever could." I felt the breath catch in my throat. "You never said anything," I whispered. "I didn't know how," he admitted. "I've spent my whole life avoiding anything that felt real. It was easier to live on the surface. Safer." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clenched together like he was holding back something too heavy to carry alone. "But every night you walked past me. Every time you sat across from me at that table without meeting my eyes, it chipped away at me." He looked down at his hands, until I started to wonder if maybe I didn't deserve to feel anything more than that silence. I shifted closer, the blanket falling away as I reached for his hands. He flinched at first, like touch wasn't something he knew how to receive. But then, slowly, his fingers laced through mine. "You do deserve it," I whispered. "We both do." He closed his eyes, breathing out like the air had been trapped in his lungs for years. When he opened them again, the storm outside seemed to quiet. Or maybe it was just that I wasn't listening to it anymore. All I could hear was him. "I don't know how to be the man you deserve," he whispered. "But I swear to you, Evelyn, I want to try." And in that moment, without any grand declarations or stolen kisses, I felt something fall into place. Not perfectly, not all at once, but like the beginning of something worth building. I leaned into him, resting my head on his shoulder as the fire cracked softly beside us. We didn't speak again that night. We didn't need to. We just sat there, wrapped in quiet, steady warmth, while the storm passed unnoticed outside. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a guest in his house. I felt like I belonged. When the call came 2 mornings later, I already knew what it would be. I had felt it in my chest the night before, lying awake in the dark, listening to Liam breathe beside me for the first time. He had stayed, without a word, without any kind of ceremony or agreement. He had stayed. But somewhere in the silence I had felt something else, a weight pressing down on my heart, a knowing I couldn't explain. So when I heard the phone ring that morning, long and low like something waiting to break, I was already standing at the window, staring out over the garden. Liam answered it. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. His voice was soft. Just one word. Okay. And then nothing. We drove in silence. The roads were empty. The morning sky pressed low and gray like the world itself was holding its breath. Liam's hand rested on the gear shift, just inches from mine, but neither of us reached across the space between us. We didn't need to. When the car finally stopped in front of the little house I hadn't seen in weeks, my breath caught in my throat. The porch light was still on. Someone had left the curtains half open, like she'd be right back. But I knew. I had known all along. Liam opened my door without a word. I stepped out, clutching the sleeves of my sweater like they could hold me together. The house felt smaller, now. Quieter. Like it had already started to let go of the life it once held. Inside, I found my father sitting by the old armchair where my mother used to read. His head was bowed, his hands shaking. I crossed the room slowly, sinking to my knees. In front of him, he didn't say anything, didn't have to. I reached for his hands, holding them in mine, and together we sat in the silence my mother had left behind. The funeral was simple. She would have hated anything grand. We stood under a pale winter sky, the wind tugging at my hair, my coat. Liam stood beside me, silent but steady, his hand brushing mine just enough to let me know he was there. I didn't cry that day, not because I didn't feel it, but because the grief settled in places tears couldn't reach. Afterward, when the guest had left and my father had retreated to his room, I wandered back into the kitchen. The old teapot was still there, chipped and worn, like nothing had changed. I reached for it on instinct, filling it with water, lighting the old stove the way my mother used to. The hum of the flame filled the quiet, wrapping around me like her voice once did. I didn't hear Liam come in, but when I turned, he was there, leaning against the doorway, watching me with something too soft to name. I poured 2 cups without a word, setting them on the little table by the window. I sank into the old wooden chair, wrapping my hands around the porcelain. Liam sat across from me, the silence stretching wide and full between us. I reached for the small wooden box I had brought from the mansion, setting it on the table. Liam's breath caught softly as I opened it again, pulling out the letter my mother had written all those years ago. I read it aloud this time, slowly, letting every word fill the space between us. There are debts that cannot be paid with money. I hope you understand why I kept my distance. I pray one day our children will not carry the weight we failed to set down. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully, tucking it back inside. She wanted peace, I whispered. Liam nodded, slowly. I think she believed we'd find it together. I looked up, searching his face for the man I had once feared. I didn't see him anymore. All I saw was the man who had stayed, who had carried more than his share, who had never asked me to carry it alone. I don't want this house to feel empty, I whispered. Liam reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. Then let's fill it again, he murmured. That night, we lit every candle in the house. Not because we needed the light, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to fill this space with something warm again. We sat on the floor in the living room, surrounded by the soft glow of flickering flames, and for the first Time and weeks, I let myself cry, not for what I had lost, but for what I had found. Liam pulled me close, wrapping his arms around me like he was trying to hold the pieces together. And for once, I let him. We didn't speak of debts, or family names, or what we had given up to get here. We just sat there, breathing in the quiet, while the house, our house, came back to life around us. I woke before the sun the next morning, though I wasn't sure I'd ever really slept. The house was still, the air heavy with that quiet kind of peace that only follows the deepest kind of loss. And yet, for the first time since I'd set foot in this place again, I didn't feel like I was standing in the middle of something broken. I felt settled, not whole, not yet, but close. Liam was still asleep, his breath steady beside me. I watched him for a moment, watched the way his face softened in the dark, all the sharpness he wore by day stripped away by sleep. I reached out, brushing my fingers lightly along his jaw, and he stirred but didn't wake. So I slipped out of bed quietly, padding down the hall to the little kitchen that had once been the heart of our home. The teapot sat on the stove, exactly where I'd left it the night before. I didn't light the flame this time. I didn't need the tea, I just needed to sit. I pulled a worn notebook from the old drawer by the window, one my mother had filled with shopping lists and half-finished recipes. I flipped past the pages until I found a blank one, and I wrote. Not. For anyone in particular. Not to settle a debt or fix a mistake, just for me, to the one who comes after us. This house has held so much more than silence. It has held promises, and heartbreak, and laughter that once filled every room. It has held loss, and it has held love. And if you ever find yourself wondering if you belong here, you do. Because sometimes home isn't something you find. It's something you choose to build. And this is ours. I signed it simply, Evelyn, folded the page carefully, and tucked it between the frame and the old window latch where I used to sit as a girl, watching the rain. I didn't know who would find it someday. Maybe no one. But it felt right, leaving something behind, something more than silence. When I turned around, Liam was standing in the doorway watching me. His hair was still tousled from sleep, his shirt hanging loose like he hadn't bothered to button it all the way. But his eyes were steady, clear in a way I hadn't seen before. He crossed the room without a word, reaching for my hand. I let him pull me close, let my head rest against his chest, feeling the quiet thump of his heart beneath my cheek. We stood there for a long time, holding on to something we'd both spent so long trying to protect, ourselves, each other, whatever this fragile new thing between us was becoming. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft enough to almost miss. I never told you what my grandmother used to say about this place. I looked up, surprised. She used to say houses remember us, he murmured. Long after we're gone, they remember the people who filled them with life. I felt my throat tighten. She was right, I whispered. Liam pressed his forehead to mine, breathing me in like he didn't know where he ended, and I began. I've spent so long trying to outrun what this family was, he said quietly. I didn't realize I could choose what it becomes next. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer. Then let's choose together, I whispered. His hands framed my face, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in the way. He kissed me. No distance. No weight of expectation or duty. Just us. We stayed in that little kitchen all morning, the light slowly filling the windows, warming the worn floorboards beneath our feet. Later, we packed a few things. The letter from my mother, the small box of memories, and the old teapot that had weathered every storm with us. We didn't need much. Not anymore. Before we locked the door behind us, I stood by the window one last time, running my fingers over the edge where I had tucked the letter away. Liam slid his arm around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Ready?" he whispered. I nodded, and together we stepped out into the morning light. We didn't go back to the mansion. We didn't need the chandeliers, or the polished floors, or the empty halls that had never felt like ours. We built something smaller, something simpler. A home with windows that let in every ounce of light we could find. A home filled with quiet laughter, warm cups of tea, and the steady hum of a life we chose, every day, to build together. And every now and then, when the house settled in the stillness of the evening, I would sit by the window with a notebook in my lap and write something down. Not because I needed to leave anything behind, but because I had learned that sometimes the smallest stories are the ones worth remembering, and ours was just beginning. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to give it a like. Every click helps us share more moments like this with people just like you. And if you don't want to miss the next journey we share together, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay with us for more stories of love, hope, and second chances.